Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Edward.
And we're with the Coquille Valley Sword Group. And today we're talking about Mojirirgamae. Mojirirgamae is the 6th kata in the Tachiseiho, and it represents a departure from the core, just most basic of the technical work. We start moving into a lot more of the kind of strategic concepts and more sneaky sword work. So it ought to be fun. We'll start off with going over the kanji for the kata, what the name means, and move from there. So let's take a second to look at the characters that make up the name Mojirirgamae. Now, Gamae, let me get in here so you can actually see that. Gamae is a shortening, or not a shortening so much as a contraction of kamae, right? Anytime you stack the words back to back, the first syllable changes. Ka to ga, ki to gi, on and on, right? And kamae is just like haso no kamae, chudan no kamae, geiran no kamae. It is posture or attitude. Now, mojiri is a word that describes a mechanical motion, torsion specifically. Now, what does that mean? It means this kind of twisting, spiraling kind of motion. And you'll see why it gets its name as we move into kata. Yeah, no fancy names. That being said, even though the full name is Mojirirgamae, it's often shortened to Mojigamae or just Moji, for ease sake. Depends on the sensei, really. So, with that, we'll go ahead and show you the kata once in demonstration, and then break it down as per normal. So, Mojirirgamae, more than any other kata, has an enormous number of variations, and it changes really pretty frequently how it's done, how each individual teacher does it, how each individual teacher kind of understands what's going on beyond just the basic application. So what I've chosen to do is show you how I saw it done from Imaisoke, because that's the best I can do. And the way I was taught, it was fairly different from how he showed it. And I think Imaisoke's demonstration represents kind of the farthest degree of sternness, and everything else kind of grows from there. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about variants in this one. Also, because of that, Eddie's going to play the role of Uchidachi. He's going to be beating me up, and I'll play the role of Shidachi. We'll go ahead and demonstrate Imai's version first, and then we'll talk through it. So let's get started. Back up, back up, back up, back up. There's. Oh. Ooh. Only the best for YouTube.
I'm so good at this.
That's okay. That's okay. So We're gonna go ahead and break it down now. So uchidachi starts just as normal, shidachi starts just as normal. He rolls to chudan, I roll to chudan. He rolls to haso just as normal. This is where things start to change. What I'm gonna do is with my right foot, I take a little half step as I begin to press into haso. Now, as I'm coming up to haso, I'm gonna bring my left foot square and even. I'm gonna bring my right foot back, and I'm going to drop down into the Mojirirgamae position. Now the Mojirirgamae position is here. I am in Koshi Mihanmi. My sword is just as in chudan. Some people will throw this kamae tip very far forward. I tend to suck my hands back and further off the line to decrease the distance between my opponent and myself and the sort of comfort range he has. Just like in chudan, if I'm out here driving him away, he's going to stay further away, right? I want to sucker him in. I want to pull him in a little bit, right? Because that's part of the beauty of the Mojirirgamae. So we've pushed into Mojirirgamae, and this is the one of two katas in which I'm going to wait and let him do all the work because I'm lazy, right? So he has to take 5 steps instead of the normal 3. Right? So now he is going to cut straight down at me, and I'm going to get him to pause right about here. With my lead foot, which is my left foot, I am going to step off the line and in line with my right foot. As I do this, I am going to make a twisting motion. If I was standing still, it would just be a circle that kind of goes around his sword. But I'm not standing still. I'm moving forward. 1, my back foot comes up. I bring it high, almost in haso. Some people throw it to haso, I don't. Whoop. And with the shinogi, or shinogi-ji or ji of my sword, I'm going to strike his mune down. Boom. And suppress him. Right? I want my hands, my sword, everything to be kind of level with his hip. Now, he knows he's in trouble, because if he moves to cut me, I'm just going to kill him. So he has to retreat. He steps back, way big. Boom. Now, as he's stepping back, I'm going to follow in behind him to push and bully him as I step up into haso. I have my right foot forward at this point. Now he's going to cut again. I'm going to step off the line with my right. My feet will come together, and straight from haso, I'll drop into that same suppression using the side of my sword. Now, here we come to the final moment of the kata. He, again, tries to clear back. I again follow him, and I come straight to him, right? In not really the half beat, but kind of between the half beat and the afterblow. I hit, I press, I take my little step to push, I come to the center line, right? He begins Kamae Otoku by rolling into Tate Zen. I drop to gate on, he chicken steps, I chicken step, and we roll out. Now, as I said before, there are a lot of variants to this. So we'll go ahead and demonstrate some of them. All right. So they all start off in the same basic way. Pull the chudan, he goes up into haso, and I come to mojiri, right? Now, in some of the variations, we both step 1, 2, 3, and we work from here, right? Now, with this, whether or not I step is the first of many of the elements that make up the different variations in the kata. The next element that can be sort of Lego pieced together to create but that represents the variants that people do, is how I make this step. In other words, as he cuts, am I stepping with my lead foot off the line? Am I stepping with my back foot and having the left foot slide in to follow it? The next is how high I bring this up. So if I'm here and he cuts, some people will bring it up quite high, almost into a jodan or like a tombogamae, right? Something really high and crazy. The next thing that people kind of go back and forth on is which way do they go? I have seen people go to the left, up and around, but by and large, the majority of people come from the right and around. And I really think that this from the right and around is the correct way to do it biomechanically. But who can say? After that, the next piece that people kind of shift and go back and forth on is how do I interact with this sword? In other words, am I striking his side with my side and then rolling it down? Almost in kind of a hikiotoshi, like from Jodo kind of motion? Or am I coming down in a suppressing motion straight on his mune, on the spine of his sword, right? I think that even though these look radically different, there isn't a big difference between the two of them, and that you should kind of play with both. Next, I told you there were a lot of variants, is how my sword interacts with his in terms of its positional relationship. In other words, when I come around, am I hitting with the shinogi-ji? Or am I hitting with the ha, the edge, right? And now immediately people are going to go, but John, you said never hit edge to edge, right? And that's true, right? Why? Because if he's swinging his sword at me and he's got 10 units of force and I've got 10 units of force and we hit our hardened martensitic edges against each other, or even if we were using like European swords that have been tempered, the force multiplication here is huge.
It's not just 20.
No, it's very big, and so you don't want to do that. This relation is different, right? If he's swinging with 10 units of force, that 10 units of force is still coming down. I mean, he might be slowing it if he's trying to slow his cut, right? And then I am applying force behind it. So I am not getting the same kind of resistance. Also, with the Japanese sword specifically, while the edge is martensite, right? It's the hardened
Very hard.
Crystalline structure for steel. The back is ferrite pearlite, right? It's soft. The mune is left unhardened. That's why they put the clay on the spine. And so I'm cutting into the back. There are tons and tons of antiques that have kizu, little wounds, literally, injuries along the spine where people have struck in. Now, some people say that's because, the person is using their mune to strike. This is
Possible?
While it's possible, I somehow don't think it's likely, because one of the primary ways that we work to break swords as a swordsmith, which I do as a day job, is to take them and hit them on the anvil on their spine, because it fractures and peels off that hard martensite. So I have a hard time kind of buying this direct contact to direct opposition theory on the mune.
It reflects because
It's much more likely that the spine is just being struck. And since we have work at Hyoho, and I've seen that sort of striking the spine work directly with the edge in other koryu, I think that's the case. I could be wrong, right? So we've changed how we've stepped, walked, stepped out of the way, cut, interacted with his sword, and positioned what part of our sword hits to him, right? After that, there does not tend to be much variation, other than obviously our steps to the center and then back to our starting positions. Ideally, if I don't take the step and he takes all the steps, we should end up in the middle of the room 3 steps back, ideally. It doesn't seem to ever work out that way, though.
Black hole opens up and
Yeah, especially when you're a little bit enthusiastic about chasing uchidachi down with your strikes. Yeah, that is pretty much it for the variations. And so I have seen them pieced together of configurations. I will say that the majority of people that do this kata don't take an initial step. The majority of people that do this kata circle to the right. The majority of people that do this kata strike with the edge of their sword against the back of the mune. That being said, the way I do the kata, I take 3 steps, I meet him in the middle, I come off the line using the back foot. Now the front foot's great. The front foot is really excellent, and truth be told, it is in my opinion the superior of the 2 steps. But the back foot's what I started with, and so it just has kind of stuck with me. So that's how I personally do it. Koryu is not as homogeneous as people imagine it to be, or at least Hyoho isn't. I obviously can't speak to other styles and their method. I think that more legalistic isn't really the right word. More very formal, pretty presentation looking styles like Toroha Bokuryu, for instance. I imagine that they have this is the exact way you do it, and you will do it exactly this way, and there is no other way that has ever been acceptable or ever will be acceptable. Of course, I could be wrong. So, that's that. So now that we've gone over the innumerable variations of how the base kata is practiced, let's talk about variations beyond that. So, just like with all of the kata so far that we've done, you can do this kata without stepping off the line. What this looks like is pretty much exactly as you would expect, right? I'm here in Mojiri, he swings at me, and I come in, right? Straight on the line, not trying to work at all. This variant is useful because it's scary as hell, right? With, say, ukinagashi or even haso, there's this feeling like you've got something in front of you protecting you. With Mojiri, you remove that thing and then drive in. So it can be a little bit of a gut check, especially if your sensei is adamant, right? Now, we talked about how I should say a very few people, I've only seen 2 examples of it, people will come in their moji circle to the left side first. Now, while that is fairly rare, there is a variation, of an applicant variant on this kata, where you moji to the other side. Now, Mojirirgamae is not like the haso katas or the ukinagashi katas. There isn't an accompanying kata that's done on the off side, right? That is basically just for those 4. That being said, this transposition to the off side in this, again, torsional motion is where I tend to use this work most often. I find that I can generally hit the person in 1 count doing this, whether or not I impact their sword. And we'll talk more about that when we do the application video next week. Next variant is, of course, the one-handed variants, right? So for the one-handed variants, I can do this as we do it in the Tachi Seiho, or I can take the position on the off side that we use in the kodachi seiho, the short sword work that you'll see. It'll be about a year before we get there, probably, if we keep up our schedule. But for simplicity's sake, I'll use the tachi side, the migi side, right? So he cuts, and again, I can step with the lead foot or I can step with the back foot. It doesn't matter. In both instances, I'm using my hips to draw the motion of the sword and to give it life. So if I'm using the back foot, hips, 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 right? Up, bop, 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 on and on and on. So those are the two variants beyond just standard kata motion. Next, we're going to look at some common errors in Mojirirgamae. Common errors when doing the Mojirirgamae katas. This is kind of a little tricky, since there is such a wide range of what people practice that is still within the concept of Mojirirgamae. So we're going to keep this kind of brief. The first is how you move into this kata. A lot of people will kind of step, right? And take those 2 steps forward, really putting them out of sync with their partner in terms of the kata as a convenient performance. The other errors that people tend to do in moving into this position is they'll take their sword way up high or way back or weird in all sorts of ways. Or when they come down, their center line will be open. Your sword should close off your center line. Now that can mean, especially if you're being super sneaky, that it rolls over and is in front of your left shoulder. But you don't want it over here, right? This is a fairly weak mechanical position for you, and it's going to make it real hard to move into the work. Now, for the actual work, the transposition, like we said, you can step with the lead foot, you can step with the back foot, feet can end up together, feet can end up in koshin mi hanmi, right? Again, most people that practice this, the feet end up together, right? But what can happen in that step is that the arms come wide and apart. What this has the effect of doing is throwing your backhand into the general region in which their sword is passing. You're stepping off the line for sure, but you're still giving a big fleshy target to somebody, especially if you've stepped poorly and they're following you with their eyes and sword, right? So what you want to do is have the sense that your wrists are somewhat glued together. So the wrists are glued together, you step, pa, or you step, ba, or you step, ba, right? With this tuk, tuk, stuckness, right? From there, after we've moved past the first suppression, or rather in the suppression itself, where do you suppress their sword, right? Do you suppress it down here? Do you suppress it out here? The ideal place to suppress it would be at the center of balance of their weapon. This is going to create the most halting and jarring effect to their posture. The closer you are to the tip, the more likely they are to evade it, like we would with Kisaki Gaishi, which you'll learn about later. The closer you are to the handle, the more likely they are to evade it through virtue of moving their hands and wrists. So you really want to try and tag that center of mass if you're trying to suppress them. But, you know, when you're fighting, trying to not suppress them, but rather to cut them, of course, you're moving in to kote or the collarbone, on and on. Where do your hands end in the suppression? Right? You want your hands to end level with your hips or deep, right? If you're too high or out here in a far position, you're not going to have the drop on them. You're not going to be able to create this downward force that really pins them down. The same is true if you get sloppy with your tip and you bring your tip over. You'll actually end up camming their sword closer towards the direction that you stepped to avoid them in. So you can very literally lead the person's sword into your direction. Now, if they're at ideal cutting distance and you've stepped out of the way and you've suppressed it, as you bring their sword down, it's not going to have the reach to hit you, but that doesn't mean that they can't fall or slip or stumble or take their next step action to catch you in some fancy ninja bullshit that they are familiar with. So, boop, sword, level with your hips, parallel to the ground, all the way across. Now, what part of my sword am I striking with, right? Ideally, I am not going to strike with my monouchi, right? Instead, I want to strike in the middle third of my sword. This is going to give me enough distance that when I strike, it's going to have a lot of meaning. The same as if I was hitting with a short sword. But it's not so close that I'm going to be sort of constricted here, right? Because I want to have the distance to be able to cut and work on them, to press them, and to respond to their work in kind. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. Again, you'll really know that you've gotten this suppression work bump by how their body reacts, right? If they're cutting you and they're in nice, good posture and you suppress them and it pulls them onto their front foot, you know that you've really hit that sort of sweet spot and really jarred it into them. Now, if you're trying to do the variation where you bring your side of the sword to their side of the sword and shuck it behind them, what you'll look for is for that arm motion to make a drastically different motion than the rest of their body, right? The areas of lighter mass will accelerate faster, whoop, and the areas with more mass will kind of have their inertia keeping them in place and slowly get peeled away. You do this good and people will start dropping their swords when you do it. But you have to play with it, right? And it is not a function of how hard you hit their sword, right? That's another common mistake, both in the suppression and in the sort of wind. It's the quality of your contact with their weapon that makes the difference. And again, that's not something that you can easily just talk about. You've got to play with it. You've got to feel with it. What the ideal way is to have someone who knows how to do it. Again, if you've got, obviously, if you've got Hyoho in your area, go study there while you're watching it on YouTube. But if you don't, like most people, but you can find Jodo, right? Find one of their students or their teacher that can do Hikiotoshi. Whoop. Because this has that same feeling, both in the shuck whoop, and in the suppressed forms. So it can give you a lot of insight feeling it with your body, and then you should be able to replicate it in short order. As for other common errors we see, obviously, if you're using your front foot to step, don't make it some big cross step so you fall over. That would be bad. The timing for the final cut, right? So we've come up into Hasso, they've come up into Hasso, they've cut, we've suppressed that last time, however we're doing it, and they start to retreat. As they retreat, we're going to follow in. It's like putting your hand in water. You move it one way and the water fills in behind, and that's what we're doing. They create that void and we're filling in behind the space. So we pin them, boom, they step back and we come in right away. The trick here is to just roll over them, right? So you hit, bottom, they retreat, you pull up, and you just roll right into their space, right on top of them, and take them. Now, just like in all of our work, you have to have posture, right? Just because you're rolling over a dude doesn't mean you want to be falling on him, because he's got work too, right? And if you're just like nonchalantly falling on him, of course he's going to take that opportunity to educate you about proper posture, right? So that is all I can really think of for Mojirirgamae in terms of common errors. So that's where we'll leave it. So that is Mojirirgamae. It is probably one of the most difficult of the Tachiseiho. It has the most variants by far, and it can be quite challenging for people for a lot of reasons. And we'll go over that a little bit more in next week's application video. But for now, pick one of the basic forms of the kata, practice it, do it until it's easy. And then, just move from there. And as always, if you want to understand this, you really have to pick up a sword and go train.